Hello, I'm Corinna Herod, and this is episode 63 of the Monday Night Review. I hope you're all well. I have just turned 39 yesterday, so I had a beautiful spoiling day, and I was able to finish reading my book, which has been Mindhunter, which I resisted reading for ages because I know that everyone was crazy about the TV show, and I really like my true crime to be a documentary rather than a sort of fictionalized version. So for ages I resisted Mindhunter, but I just finished the book and I loved it. So if you're into true crime, Mindhunter by John Douglas, famed criminal profiler, is really amazing. Massively recommend that. I do have reading recommendations over on the blog, which is the themondaynightrevue.blogspot, which I do need to update, but also I will probably do some reading recommendations over on the Patreon for all of the lovely patrons we have over there. As always, I just hugely appreciate your support. So thanks for that. Now, this one has been in the pipeline for the last year, I'd say, and it had to wait. It had to be this week that it was released because I lived for 20 years in West London, mostly West London, and the August bank holiday is a big deal if you live in West London. So this week's episode, we're going to talk about the history of Notting Hill Carnival. Now, I married a West Londoner for whom Notting Hill Carnival was the biggest weekend of the year, and yes, he is a private school white boy, but his entire record collection was reggae and roots, and we would go to Carnival every year until the amount of kids and dogs we had ruled it out. The only downside to Carnival is that if you're a girl, peeing is really difficult. I remember having to squat in the middle of a circle made up by what I call habs, husbands and boyfriends, facing in the other direction. They literally just had to stand linked arms in a circle so that a group of us girls could pee because there was literally nowhere else to go. And basically you just stand and you dance and you walk and you drink beer all day. So you're going to have to pee. So bear that in mind. I should say that none of the habs were mine. Dragging my husband, at the time boyfriend, away from a sound system was nigh on impossible. And mobile phones were not what they are today. So just going for a pee was a dodgy event in case I never found him again. Apparently, there's now an app that can help you get around, but from my experience, your phone basically struggles to work once you're in there. So, you know, it's really good. I'm going to talk about it at the end, but it's really good to maybe plan a route, plan what you want to see, or plan where you'll meet people if you get lost, and then basically accept that you're going to get lost. Stick like glue to those you cannot lose and accept that you'll lose others, find some amazing new people and just have an amazing time. If you go to Carnival expecting to not get lost, you're going to get freaked out. So obviously today's episode was not going to involve murder. I wanted to celebrate the history of such a vital part of West London, which was my home for so long. But wherever I turn, murder is there. And to get to Carnival, first we need to talk about the murder of Kelso Cochrane in 1959. And to do that, we're going to go back to the Windrush generation, with the name given to those who arrived in the UK between 1948 and 1971 from Caribbean countries to fill the post-war UK labour shortages. So the Caribbean at the time was part of the British Commonwealth, so its subjects were therefore British and able to live and work in the UK. They just needed to get there. So to fill these labour shortages, the British government sent boats to bring over anyone who wanted to take up this offer of travel to UK and jobs and a new way of life. The first boat to arrive was the MV Empire Windrush, docking in Tilbury on the 22nd of June 1948, bringing 492 passengers from Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago and other islands. Many had come on the promise of well-paid work for which they were qualified, but were not prepared for the harsh weather, low pay and frosty reception. They would fill many roles in the early in the early form of the NHS. They were nurses, cleaners, orderlies. And so they were hugely vital, but not necessarily performing roles that would, again, give them good standing to the already established white society. What made matters worse for their future families was that there's no proper paperwork issued. So because at the time it was in the Commonwealth, you were British, there was no official paperwork. And if you had children or you were travelling over as a child, they were on parents' passports. Later changes in law would mean that no paperwork meant no right to remain here or ability to return here if you left. No passport meant you were trapped. You had no documents allowing you to get one. It could mean no work, no NHS treatment, no bank account, no driving licence. You basically didn't exist and had no right to. Many people who had arrived with the Windrush generation or were born to families who were now deemed illegal immigrants. This would all come to a head in the Windrush scandal, something which rumbles on, far from resolved as we speak. And it's still affecting many families who've worked hard for the lives they've built on a promise of paradise that, wasn't delivered. Lots of people I think over 83 people who've been deported based on this lack of paperwork, some of whom have lived here all their lives. They were born here, but because they don't have that paperwork, they're not counted as being British citizens. In the 1950s, the official number of Caribbean immigrants to London is given at around 160,000. Though this is like to be an underestimate, as stowing away to make the journey was a really viable option. In reality, the figures are likely to be at least 50% more than that, with Brixton and Notting Hill having the largest Caribbean population in Britain. Many of these Caribbean immigrants had travelled on the promise of work and prosperity and were just not prepared for the realities of Britain, this hostile weather and hostile white people. And Notting Hill was a stronghold for the Union movement, Oswald Mosley's fascist party, and the White Defence League. And in 1958, a race riot broke out that caused chaos for days. The white teddy boys were riled into a frenzy with the desire to keep Britain white and send them back, citing the Caribbean community as taking over their jobs, and possibly more concerningly, the horror of a mixed race relationship. In fact, the majority of the teddy boys involved in racist movements were unemployed before and wouldn't want the undervalued, underpaid work that the immigrants were being offered. That work was not what they had been promised and was often way below their skill level, but they took it as a means to keep their family going. These teddy boys were fighting to protect a status quo that never existed. Sound familiar, Brexit? The attacks were indiscriminate, with only 9 Teds ever taken to trial and sentenced to just 4 years in prison each. The Caribbean community felt drawn together to stand up against racial thuggery. Kelso Cochrane was born in Antigua and moved to the United States, where he was briefly married. And in 1954, after his marriage failed, he moved to Notting Hill in London, where he worked as a carpenter, hoping to save enough money to study law. On the 16th of May 1952, 32-year-old Cochrane fractured his thumb at work and went to Paddington Hospital to get checked out. While walking home just after midnight, he was attacked by a gang of white men who stabbed him repeatedly with a stiletto. They were chased off by 3 other men who took Cochrane back to the hospital he'd just left, but he died of his injuries soon after arriving. The police held that his murder was a robbery gone wrong, but his fiancée maintained that he had no money on him. He'd emptied his wallet of money that morning, and that the attack was racially motivated. It's worth mentioning that a stiletto is designed to stab, and obviously knives are designed to stab, but it's a really nasty instrument. It's going to do a lot of damage. It was later claimed by the Union movement that one of their members had committed the murder. So even then it was admitted that it was a racial attack. And there were witnesses who were too scared of reprisals to come forward. And it was known who the attackers were, though their names wouldn't come out until apparently in 2011, though it's still not possible to find the names of these people, and no one would ever be charged for his murder. The police didn't try very hard to solve the murder of Kelso Cochrane. This was probably down to racism within the force at the time and wanting to pass it off as a robbery to make it seem that the problems in the area weren't at the crisis point that they really were. The press said Cochrane had been drinking, even though this was ruled out by the pathologist, and the fact that his wallet was found empty was very convenient, though obviously, as I said before, his fiancée said that he had deliberately emptied his wallet that morning. Also, from my experience, if you rob someone, you just take their wallet, or you take the money out of the wallet. It sounds like I've been robbing people, doesn't it? You take the money out of the wallet and throw it down. You don't put it back in the pocket neatly. The whole thing was mishandled from start to finish, but Cochrane's murder became emblematic of the racial tensions in the area at the time and the lack of community between the many different cultures that lived there. Cochrane's death is believed to be one of the reasons for the decline in support of Oswald Mosley, who'd been planning on a return to politics but received less than 2,000 votes in the Kensington North general election in October that year. The death of Cochrane caused all support for Mosley and his party to evaporate. Over 1,200 people attended Cochrane's funeral, white and black, and people were just tired of the unrest and the division and realised that they needed to do something themselves. The dance halls, pubs and clubs in Notting Hill and around London had operated a racist door policy for years. Their main concern was that black men were fraternising with white women, and fraternising they were because the ratio of men to women coming over from the Caribbean was at 2-1. Young men were more able to just get up and leave, as they always are. And a lot of them may have had families at home. They wanted to come to Britain, make some money and send it home or bring their families over. But these men wanted to go out on a Saturday night. They wanted to have fun, and this would, of course, lead to them meeting white women. Also worth noting that in the 1950s, the majority of well-to-do Jamaican women would not be seen dead in a British dance hall. So, in the end, the attempts at segregation didn't work at all, and they created a stronger cohesion among excluded and working class people. Famously, signs would be put up outside hotels and places of accommodation saying no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. And in the 50s and 60s, the Irish community in Notting Hill blended fairly happily with their black immigrant neighbours, outcasts united and wanting to live their lives freely, socialise, drink and listen to music. Something I'm old enough to have experienced the tail end of was the influence of reggae on punk, leading to punk covers, ska punk, and even bands like The Clash going over to record in Jamaica. Sound system culture was attractive and inclusive, and it sowed the seeds for the amazingness of Notting Hill Carnival. There was already a strong Jamaican influence in the London music scene prior to the first Notting Hill Carnival. As early as 1955, Duke Vin had set up his sound system in Ladbroke Grove, and 1 year later, Count Suckle followed suit, and a rivalry was established. There was finally a place for Jamaicans to party in the Kingston style. In 1959, Trinidad and Tobago journalist and activist Claudia Jones organised a series of events to celebrate Caribbean culture in the face of hate from the white racists. And this was the seed that would grow into Notting Hill Carnival, now second in size only to the Carnival in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. These first events were inside, but showcased Caribbean Carnival in a cabaret style with steel bands, dance troupes, and finishing with the Carnival Beauty Queen beauty contest and a grand finale jump up by West Indians who attended the event. Duke Vin is credited with co-founding Notting Hill Carnival, and his sound system, Duke Vin the Ticklers, was always there until his death in 2012. His sound system encouraged others to join and paved the way for the many sound systems on the Carnival today. In 1966, Ruan Laslett organised the Notting Hill Fair, So unaware of the inside events that were being organised, it was this attempt at cultural unity, and it started as a street party for the neighbourhood kids that turned into a procession when Russell Henderson's steel band, who are regulars at Claudia Jones's indoor events, decided to go on a walkabout through the streets. By 1970, Russell Henderson's band was joined by Selwyn Baptiste's Notting Hill Adventure Playground steel band, and they would be joined by up to 500 dancing spectators. The carnival would start at Emsley Honeyman's Pleasance, a park in the Kensal Green area, with Trinidadian Frank Cricklow's Mangrove Restaurant acting as a communication hub and informal office for the organisers. One of the most significant directors of the carnival was a Trinidadian teacher, Leslie Palmer, who was director from 1973 to 1975. He's credited with getting sponsorship, recruiting more steel bands, reggae groups and sound systems, introducing generators and extending the route. He encouraged traditional masquerade, and for the first time in 1973, costume bands and steel bands from the various islands took part in a street parade, alongside the introduction of stationary sound systems to join the ones on the moving floats. By 1975, Notting Hill Carnival was huge, popularised by a live radio broadcast by Alex Pascal on his daily Black Londoners programme for BBC Radio London. Notting Hill Carnival has in the past had an unfairly bad rep and has not been without its problems. Part of the problem was that there was no permission from local authority, so initially police just had the aim of preventing Carnival from happening at all. By 1976, around 150,000 people now attended the distinctly Caribbean Carnival, and they had a 1,600-strong police force that were anticipating trouble and prepared to be heavy-handed. They went in on a few pickpockets operating in the crowd, and the mainly Caribbean youth fought back, feeling the police were being really overzealous. There was considerable press coverage of this disorder, which some felt took an unfairly negative and one-sided view of the carnival, and it looks as if carnival was going to be banned. Interestingly, Prince Charles was one of the few establishment figures who supported the event. Activist and editor Leila Hassan began campaigning for the Arts Council England to recognise Notting Hill Carnival as an art form. Claire Holder, the longest-serving chair of the Carnival Committee from 1989 to 2002, instituted appearance fees and prizes for the mass bands, as well as securing significant corporate sponsorship for the Carnival as a whole. This was really important for the bands, both in terms of recognition of the art form and giving them opportunities for development. Mass bands are a huge feature of the carnival, and they parade through Notting Hill in fantastic costumes, representing a theme that changes annually. The word mass comes from masquerade, and it goes back to the 1800s and the emancipation from slavery in the Caribbean. Before freedom, the masters would have balls and parties that the slaves would not be invited to, but the slaves would have their own parties and ridicule the masters, mimicking their gowns and clothes, but with a traditional African spin. When they were free, this continued as a carnival celebration with a fusion of African and European cultures, with recurring characters seen every year. Mass was introduced to the carnival by Leslie Palmer in 1973, and over the years, distinct bands of masqueraders formed. In 1980, the Arts Council officially recognised mass as an art form, making funding available and protecting the event. Through the 80s and 90s and noughties, the attitude of police towards the carnival has really improved. They're less heavy-handed while still maintaining a huge presence. Crowd control barriers introduced around 2010 were seen as an abomination initially, but actually make it a lot easier to move in both directions. Today, police are less hostile to carnival than many of the millionaires and billionaires that live along the route and generally spend the weekend away. Luckily, the gentrification of Notting Hill is slow, with tons of council housing and estates in the area, as well as a second-generation immigrant families happily hanging on to their flats that are now worth a cool 3 or 4 million. For lots of people, Notting Hill Carnival invokes violence and mayhem, but this is likely a result of media coverage. It's worth mentioning that the crime rates for Carnival is comparable to Glastonbury and other big music events. 2 men were murdered in the Carnival in the year 2000. but this was a gang-related incident. From then on, the approach to policing was conciliatory but plentiful, with upwards of 11,000 police at the carnival. In 2007, 2 men were shot near the carnival, and this kind of got lumped in as a problem with the carnival, but it just so happened that it was near the route, nothing really to do with it. The 2008 carnival was marred by rioting at the very end of the weekend, involving about 40 youths battling with police, and more than 300 people were arrested. In the 3 weeks running up to the 2017 event, the police made 656 arrests as a preemptive crackdown. There were 313 arrests during the 2 days of the 2017 carnival, compared with 454 the year before. On both days, a minute's silence in tribute to the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire, which was so close to the route, was observed at 3 p.m. by carnival goers, many of whom wore green for Grenfell. Since 1987, there's actually only been 5 deaths caused by violence at carnival, and I know that may seem a lot, but that's 30 years. On the 30th of August 1987, 23-year-old Michael Augustine Galvin, a stall holder, was stabbed. On the 26th of August 1991, 38-year-old Nicholas John Hanscom bled to death after being stabbed in the thigh. 28th of August 2000, 21-year-old Greg Fitzgerald Watson was stabbed to death after an argument over food. 28th of August 2000, 28-year-old Abdul Munam Bhatti was killed in what the police believed was a racially motivated attack. 9 men were sentenced for violent disorder that year. 9 men were sentenced for violent disorder as a result of this in 2002. And on the 30th of August 2004, 27-year-old Lee Christopher Zubaran was shot by a gang using a machine pistol for showing disrespect. In 2005, 3 men were jailed for life for his murder. So for almost 2 decades, there have been no fatalities at Carnival, and it's also worth noting that London has a high crime rate. You have to factor in the usual London crime rates, that just so happens that it's a Carnival weekend. While there are definitely big gangs of kids streaming through crowded points, it's possible and very annoying to have your foot trodden on or food knocked out of your hand. However, overcrowding and movement through the carnival have improved massively, and it's best just to get your head up, have a look around when you're approaching a crowded point, and just use your common sense. Apart from gangs and violence, Carnival has come under criticism for its cost to the London taxpayer, with the cost of policing the event more than £6 million. But to put that into context, the Carnival is estimated to bring approximately 93 million into the local community. In 2002, Ken Livingstone, an annoying mayor of London, wanted to change the route and use Hyde Park to hold people and run the floats. Basically, he wanted to health and safety the shit out of Notting Hill Carnival. No thanks, didn't work. Notting Hill today is for the most part a nice place to live. It's got a really good mix of cultures, backgrounds and situations. If I could live anywhere in London, Notting Hill is where I'd want to be. And if you do live in Notting Hill, you will have a huge party on your doorstep every year in the August bank holiday weekend. If it's not your thing, then get out of town for the weekend. But it is incredibly fun and for the most part really family friendly. I have a few friends who live on the Carnival route, and it's so nice to be able to go to Carnival, go home, hang out, sit on the windowsill, watch all the partiers go past. It's really good if you've got small kids and you perhaps can't stay out as late as you wanted to, or don't want to go on the Monday, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's just Notting Hill I love anyway. As soon as you get off the tube at Ladbroke Grove, there's this lovely feel to it. It's usually got some music playing. There's usually some reggae, some steel bands, something going on. There's a market. It's just got the best bits of London all in one place, I think. I know that North Londoners will disagree. In 2009, 50 years after his death, a blue plaque was erected to Kelso Cochrane opposite the site of his murder to commemorate his death. It's near Goulburn Road for those of you who are going to visit. Notting Hill Carnival is still a community-led event and also recognised as one of the world's largest annual arts events. My tips for Carnival is to find the sweet spot between organisation and having no plans at all. Check out where the sound systems are, or go with someone who knows. I've never had to check it out. My husband has got like his own little Notting Hill Carnival map imprinted in his brain, and have a vague idea of who you want to see and where they'll be. Take a bottle of water and as little else as possible. You'll need your wallet. As with any big place, I would always take my wallet and have it stashed somewhere safely. But you do not want to have a backpack. You do not, because you're just going to be walking and dancing and hanging out, and there'll be shops open and everyone's everywhere. You don't need a lot of stuff. And wear your comfiest pair of shoes. Sound systems are a huge feature of Notting Hill Carnival, having originated in Jamaica in the 1950s as basically homemade PAs. You get a turntable, an amp, and the biggest set of speakers you can find. And there are some real Carnival classics: Rap Attack, Abashanti, Channel 1, Gaz's Rockin' Blues, Good Times, King Tubby's, Rampage. And you can find a huge array of music. US and UK garage, soulful, deep, funky house, hardcore, techno, trance, drum and bass, Miami bass, hip hop, trap, grime, Afrobeat, swing beat, dub reggae, roots, rock, reggae, ragga, revival reggae, lovers rock, soca, calypso, jazz funk, fusion, R&B, disco, soul funk from the 70s, 80s and 90s, rare groove, Latin, pop, ska and rocksteady. There's been no Notting Hill Carnival for the past 2 years, thanks to the plague, but it's back next weekend. So if you fancy dancing the streets, eating good food, there's over 300 food stalls, and listening to excellent music, then go down and have a great time. Sunday is family day, so it's the day to go with your kids. You can walk in and walk out. It's really hard to explain. When I first went to Carnival, I was really intimidated. But you can walk in and walk out. You walk in, it's crazy. There's dancing, there's amazing costumes, there's whistles, there's food stalls everywhere. And you can literally walk out the sides and find a pub with the football on or a cafe. So if you go in, it's not your thing, you can go out again. It's not going to cost you anything. It's just such a fun atmosphere. So yeah, Sunday's family day. Monday is the day where the dancing gets a little wilder, the costumes get a little less, and the beer flows a little more freely. So Monday is definitely a day for grown-ups, but go forth and party with over 2 million other people. There is nothing like it. And that is the story of Notting Hill Carnival. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I genuinely had planned for it to not be murder orientated, but I, for one, didn't know anything about the murder of Kelso Cochrane, so it was so interesting for me to see how the carnival actually started, because I am guilty of just turning up and having an amazing time and not really thinking too much about how it all started and why it all needed to begin. As always, I love to hear from you. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're at The Monday Night Revue. Come and join the Patreon. You can listen ad-free. You can get mini-sodes, extra content. I will get my arse in gear and get the first merch t-shirts up eventually. You can email me at themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.